Okay. Just preparing a live stream. Nice. Detroit. Okay, we are officially live on YouTube, and I'm going to start recording. Oh, it's already recording. All right, cool. Ready to get started? Awesome. Okay. Yeah, so excited to have Pamela Barba here. Before I do the introduction, I did want to give out just a couple of reminders here for the folks on the call. There is a Q&A tool up. So if you did have any questions, feel free to submit them there. We'll be saving some time at the end of the call to be able to answer some of those questions. There's a question in there that you like, definitely upvote it just so that we can prioritize how we sort of answer these questions here. At the end of the call, there's also going to be a bit.ly link that we're going to be throwing up onto the screen. Through there, you'll be able to actually get taken to the form, so you can fill out the form to be able to get one of 4 scholarships that we're going to be giving out to have a one-on-one session with Pamela. So again, super excited to have you here, Pamela. Just to give a quick bio for the folks that are on the call, Pamela Barba is a proud immigrant. When she was 10 years old, Pamela's family migrated to the United States with $500 to their name. Now, as a business and brand strategist, she helps her clients uncover their gifts and get paid. Her unique approach blends design, coaching, and strategy. Pamela is often described by clients as being equal parts magical and practical. I like that. Her inspiring stories and grounded advice have been featured on Forbes and on stations nationwide. So with that, I'll hand it off to you, Pamela.
Yay, thank you so much. Can y'all hear me okay? Yes. Okay, awesome. So thank y'all for being here. Thank you for Tequeria for hosting. I am so excited. I am a nerd and I love to share this stuff. So it's truly a gift to be able to be here with all of you and to share this. So I am going to start sharing my screen and hopefully it won't happen too awkwardly. Let's see, share screen. Oh, you know what? It's still not allowing me to share my screen, Brian, on this account either. It says, there we go, let's see.
Give it a shot.
And I am adding a link on the chat right now. That link is to, no, it's still doing this. It'll only let me share the specific like whiteboard. One second. Until then, if y'all could take a look at that, let's see, take a look at that file. There we go. Now we're awesome. This is going to work now. Great. Can we see my screen? Awesome. So thank you so much again. I'm so excited to be here. First things first, just like a quick agenda. I told you that I'm going to teach you 4 things that you need to know for your personal brand, and I am going to do that. There is a link where you can find the worksheet, and in this worksheet, it'll help you kind of follow along with me, but also help you dig deeper into your personal brand after the call. And I'll be answering questions at the end, so feel free to drop them in the QA feature, and then we'll take a look. And just one more time, here's the tiny URL link so that y'all can grab that. So my name is Pamela, and I was born in Ecuador in 1989, 31 years ago. And I, had a pretty chill life and childhood until Ecuador went into an economic crisis 10 years later, and we migrated to the United States. When we migrated to the United States, my family literally had nothing. We brought suitcases full of stuff that we were going to try to sell to make a living off of that. It didn't work, but still we were here, and I was very lucky. This picture on the left is me graduating with my bachelor's in fine arts with a degree in graphic design. I was the first in my family to graduate college here. And shortly after that, I got my like quote unquote dream job. That's what this picture here is on the right, with my coworker Destiny. And through this time of my family going from like having nothing to us building a life, I discovered that one of my strengths was telling stories. And one of my strengths, and that strength is like what helped me connect to jobs, to opportunities, to get scholarships for college, like all the things, right? And over time, I learned to tell my story more and more. I started going on stages, and my voice got a little bit louder, and I got a little bit more sure of what I was sharing each time. And I learned that there is something really, really special about connecting with people through our stories. I started having these crazy opportunities from stories that I like didn't even think mattered. I didn't think my story mattered. I definitely didn't think I should share it. My parents told me not to share it. It's like, be careful, don't stand out too much. But as I shared it, I was able to do cool things, and eventually even landing a couple Forbes articles. And this is all from my story and this kind of experience. So I want to talk about what is branding anyway. Branding is not just a sleek logo or colors or a beautiful website. And I know a lot of you probably see the word branding and you're like, okay, Pamela, like, tell me how to make it look good. Tell me how to like, go there and like attract all the things with this beautiful brand. But before we do that, we will get to that. But before we even talk about that, we have to talk about like, what is the inner part of branding? And this is the part that most people don't understand. What branding really is how people feel when they interact with you, how they feel before, during, and after. And so I want you to think about any brands that you love. I really, really don't think that you select to buy from them or to work from them because you love their like the color that they use, or because you love the logo that they use, right? You buy from something because it gives you a great experience, or because it functions great, or because you love that shipping happens in 2 days and you're excited to get that product in 2 days. There is a feeling that you have when it comes to brands and products. And just the same, there are feelings that people have when they interact with you. So we all have that friend that like, as soon as you text them, the little dots come up because they're already responding. Like, that person is reliable. If you're stuck in a ditch, like that's who you're going to text, versus your friend that like never responds. That is not reliable, right? So those are all things that are part of your brand. And so when many people come to me, they're like, Pamela, tell me how to make my brand beautiful. And what I want you to understand is that there are 2 parts of your brand. So yes, your brand is like a little house that you're building, that you're going to live in, that you're going to hang your pictures in, and eventually you're going to invite people into. And then there's like the outside part of your house, like your little garden, your little sign that's going to say like, please come in or whatever. And what most people want to focus on is the outside part of your house. But until we get the inside in order, there is no point in focusing on the outside. So as we're talking about this, we will get to that outside point, but I just want you to realize that the things that make your brand strategic and powerful and useful are the things that are actually inside. So we'll be talking about some of those things, and you might be thinking, like, what does this have to do with anything? I promise there is a point to it. Now, let me just pause. I can't look at the chat. So if there's something major that I'm missing, I'll ask somebody to unmute and let me know. So there are 4 basic questions to create a good brand strategy. And so we start with, who are you? That is the first question that you have to be able to ask yourself and answer in order to create a great personal brand. Your brand starts with you. It starts with your story. Personal stories help us connect on a deeper emotional level. There is a very intentional reason why I start my presentations with telling you more about my story, telling you more about my family, because that is allowing you to connect to me in a way differently than if I just came in with like a PowerPoint with like a million points and I just started throwing information at you. And humans are emotional creatures. Our brain is like processing millions of information a day, and you're trying to decide like what is going to keep me alive from this information. You're trying to survive. You're trying to see what is the most important. And when we connect through stories, when we connect through emotions, we're able to kind of break through some of that clutter of just having a million messages thrown at us. So intentionality with your personal brand means that you have control of your narrative. And this is what I love about branding. You have control over the story that you tell about yourself, right? That's one of the things that's like not so great about history. It's like the person that wrote the history books gets to make themselves look like the hero. But when it comes to your brand, that's actually like a great thing because you get to tell people what you want them to know and what you want them to think about you. Ooh. So one big question that I get with people with personal brands is that they say like, Pamela, my experience is all over the place. I don't even know how to like, how do I walk into an interview and feel confident with that? And I'm here to tell you, my resume looks exactly how they tell you resumes should not look. 2 years here, 1 month, not 1 month, 9 months here, 1 year here, because there is a lot of things that I was trying to learn early in my career. And I did that by trying different positions. So if I just walked in with this, I might not feel so confident. I might not feel like, I know what I'm doing or that people can trust me with what I'm here to do. But with your resume and with your experience, it is all about the story that you tell about your career trajectory so far, right? So I can tell you that with each of these positions, I was always trying to understand and to focus on how to help people and how to communicate clearly with people. And I can tell you a really strong story about how I went from being a small business family and wanting my family to have access to more things to being a graphic design student where I learned to communicate and focused on how to create great messaging to help people like my family, to working at a nonprofit where I'm still just like focused on doing good and figuring out how can I make people's lives better, to working in project management, where again, my focus was about people and understanding how do teams work, how can I help them, how can I make this better? And finally, to being a college professor, where I was like, oh my gosh, I can teach. That is kind of the intersection of communication and people. And I am in love with this. And so this is one of the exercises that I have on the extra credit part of your worksheet is to list out the different positions that you've been in and to look for that common thread. And some of these positions could be volunteer positions. It could be just something that you did and you didn't get paid for, but you still loved it. And think about what is the common thread that is going to allow you to tell that strong story about that matches not just who you are and where you come from, but the skills that you want to use and where you want to go. So that's what I want you to take away from this part is that you control the narrative of your career. And also it takes time and practice. It took me so much time and so many years to practice thinking about how do I tell this story? And, it changes over time too, right? Like with this same kind of career map that I have, I would tell a very specific story if I was trying to get hired on as an educator again, versus if I was trying to get hired on as like a culture person within HR of a company, which I might have the skills for both of those things, but how I tell my story leading me to that point might be different. And I always like to show this. This is, if you know me and if you follow me on Instagram, or if you've seen me, you can see that I'm like pretty vocal about my story. But this is a post that I made just even 3 years ago, where I was terrified to write a caption. I was terrified to use my voice. I was terrified to share any part of my story. You also control where you go next. This is the part, again, we're talking about building your house, and what kind of things you want to attract to your house. You can control that by setting a goal. And this part is so, so, so important, because part of taking control of your narrative, part of taking control of your career, is you can plan where you want to go next. And that really comes with intentionality of like figuring out like, okay, I really want to get hired for this sort of position, or I really want to get asked to speak on panels. I really want to write more, or I really want to shift careers completely into something that I don't do. So that's how you start, by setting a goal for your personal brand. Until you set a goal, and then until you have a clear idea what your goal is, I wouldn't worry too much about like posting all the time and looking perfect in terms of like your personal brand, because without this kind of like building block, it's hard to do anything with intentionality if you don't know where you're trying to go. Ooh. So the next question that you need to think about is, who needs to know? So you know your story, you know where you're coming from, you know your goal. Now we're thinking about who needs to know, who is your audience? And a lot of the times when I'm working with people, you know, what I hear is, well, I don't have an audience, or my audience is anybody that will listen to me, anybody that will hire me. But you really have to be specific about who your audience is. Otherwise, it's not going to be very effective. So here's you and your house and your little yard, and here's your audience. And so thinking about it, for example, where do they hang out on the internet? Like, are they on Instagram or are they on Twitter? And when you think about your audience, I want you to be specific as possible. So if, for example, your goal is to go work at a certain company, I would think about like, what is the size of that company? Who makes the hiring decision, or who would be the person that decides to bring me in for an interview? Is it a recruiter? Is it, you know, if it's a small company, maybe, and I want to go into the UX team, maybe it's one of the higher ups within the UX team. So really know who is the person that's going to help you get to that goal. And get to know them. Like, what kind of podcasts do they listen to? What does their day look like? Are they swamped all day? Or do they have time to have coffee chats and look at portfolios? What is their role within their organization? Where are they finding applicants? And I know that a lot of these things you won't know right off the bat, but that's where like the getting curious part is important. And so again, remember your goal. Your goal is what should always be guiding you as you're thinking about your personal brand. You know, whatever it is, whether it's a career switch or go into grad school, whatever it may be for you. The next piece that, and by the way, I know this webinar is being recorded, so I'm kind of flying through this because I know that if you wanted to go back and watch something, you can. I tried to pack as much content as I could without making this incredibly overwhelming, because I want you to have a great brand. So just know that you can always go back and rewatch this and spend some more time with each question. So yeah. So the next question is, why should they care? Why should this audience that you have in mind care about you? Why should they care that you exist? You know, what's in it? What's in it for them? So a lot of the times when we finally find our audience and we're like, yes, I finally understand what Pamela was talking about, I've identified my audience, we can be a little intense. Or we can assume that they're just going to look at us when they're really like not aware that we're there. Right. So we're like super excited that they exist. We're super excited that we know who they are, and they're like just unaware, apathetic about, who we are, because they don't know us yet. So that's the important thing to know with this question. Why should people care that you do the thing that you do, that you are a great engineer or designer? Like, what's in it for them? And so when you think about your audience, they're kind of over here in the corner, like looking at their phone, looking away from you. So it's our job to create a great brand that can reach them. And again, when we go back to thinking about our brain is like processing so much information at the time, we tend to disregard anything that's not immediately useful to us. So you have to be able to not just have a great brand that speaks about you and your story and your goal, but to be able to communicate to a person how you would be an asset for them as well. And the better that you understand your audience, the easier it will be to get their attention. And again, just remembering that we're all on our phones, getting a million messages, emails, social media, all the things all the time. And we want something that's going to actually like stop the scroll and get somebody to respond to you, to follow you on Instagram, to follow you on Twitter, to check out your LinkedIn, whatever it is. We want to get their attention and we want them to stop, which is a hard thing to do. And so I know that if you're just starting to think about this idea of your audience and who they may be, you might have more questions than answers, which is a great place to start. So do research, talk to people in the field, ask your network for help. And when you're asking for help, be as specific as possible. I get a lot of requests from people, and if I get a request in my inbox and it's not specific enough and I don't know how to help, like, it unfortunately gets skipped, versus when people are really specific about like, hey, I'm interested in joining a marketing department inside like a fintech startup. Do you know somebody that could help me learn more about this type of role? Or for example, for me, I was really interested in learning more about design thinking over the last few years. So I reached out to a lot of my friends that were in that world. And I said, hey, I want to learn more about design thinking. Like, how does it work? How can I learn about it? And I had this very specific kind of question. I was like, how can I get into that field without getting like a crazy expensive design MBA kind of degree? And that was kind of my ask. Another way to do research is, if you're continuously interviewing for the same sort of position, ask questions during the interview process. I have been on teams where I'm on the hiring end, and it was incredible to me how many people walk in and don't ask any questions. They feel like they have to like walk into an interview and act like they know everything so that they can increase their chances of being hired. But when you're interviewing, it's just as much of an opportunity for you to ask questions and get to know the company, get to know the interviewer, than it is for them to get to know you. So ask questions and get to figure out, like, I don't know, if you're trying to enter UX, like figure out like, what are the challenges that UX teams face? And the more that you talk and the more that you do research, the better you'll be able to create your brand and make sure that you are addressing these things within your brand. And then finally, the last question is, how will they find you? So this is the part where we're talking about like the outside of the house, the actual like branding part that many people picture when we're talking about brands, right? This might be your website. This might be your social media presence. This is the shiny part of branding. And so I've given you this personal brand checklist where you can kind of self-assess, like, what are the things that I'm doing and what are the things that I'm not doing and that I could do better. And I would like to pause and say right now that, we live in a really overwhelming world. Like, there's all these things that you should do. And I know that sometimes, like, thinking about a personal brand can feel like, oh my gosh, just like one more thing that I have to do that I'm supposed to do. So I do want to pause real quick and talk about when you should be working on your brand and like when is it cool to take a break. I believe everybody should have a personal brand, even if you have a job. You never know what can happen to that job. So it's great to keep a record of like, here are the projects I've worked on. I got this really great review. Let me keep track of all these things. So I think everybody should have kind of like the bare bones of a personal brand. But really, when it comes to like heavily promoting yourself or like creating content or posting a lot to bring people back kind of to you, that I'm like, okay, like there might be times when you're more actively looking. And so those are times when you really want to be out there promoting, showing yourself, showing your work, interacting. And then there might be times when you're like, I'm just kind of chilling. I just got this job. It took a lot of work and I'm just going to relax for a minute. And so I do want you to know you don't always have to be promoting, and your brand like can be something that you kind of refresh every few months. So I'm going to go through and talk through kind of what are all these different pieces and what do they look like. And so this one's really simple. I promise you, when you apply to something, the first thing somebody's going to do is they're going to Google you, or they're going to click on the links that you gave them. Again, going back to that idea of you control the narrative when it comes to your brand. So when somebody Googles you, like, what shows up? So, go on your browser, put on incognito or private mode and Google yourself and see what comes up. See if you like what comes up, or see if you come up at all. Because that is what likely somebody is going to see. Do you have a headshot? This is so important. I am a really big proponent of photography. It really helps people connect with you. We hire people, we want to work with people, and there's just something about our brains that we're made to, look for that face, look for the eyeballs, look for the smile, to help us know, like, to just make us feel like we know this person better. And so when you have a brand and I Google you and there's like no picture of you, this is like number one on the list. And this picture I took with my iPhone 4 on a timer at my parents' house. So there is no excuse to not being able to just get a good picture of yourself. I recommend that you are alone. I recommend that it's clear and that you try to keep it from being too busy. You have a positioning statement. A positioning statement might look different for different industries, but basically what I want to see, I want to quickly learn who you are, what you do, and who you work with. And again, this is something that is probably more important when you are looking for a job or when you're looking for a certain kind of opportunity. Like, say you're like happily employed and you're not looking for a job right now, but you are really passionate about something, and you want to get more speaking opportunities about that. So then maybe your positioning statement is showing us that, is saying like, hey, I'm looking to be on panels about women in tech or something. So you get to tell people who you are and what you want to do. And when you think about your positioning statement, kind of where this would live is maybe on your Instagram bio, your Twitter bio, your LinkedIn headline. So these are kind of like the practical applications of a brand, because I know not everybody here is a designer. Not everybody here is going to go get a designer and go get a brand guide and all these things, right? But these are all things that you can do yourself. The important thing with a positioning statement also is that it helps people advocate for you. It helps me see who, like if I have a friend, it helps me see who they are, what they might be interested in, how I can help them. And it gives, like, that's a big part of your brand too, is like giving other people the knowledge to support you, to advocate for you. The next thing is, can I see your work? And this does not have to be a website. This could be an IG portfolio, a Dribble account, a GitHub account. What matters here is that people can see that you are dedicated to whatever your thing is, right? So this is actually my friend Jonathan. Jonathan was an architecture student, and he decided that he hated architecture. At the time, I was working in a visual effects department, and we had a huge 3D department. And Jonathan wanted to make the jump from architecture to visual effects, leaning on his 3D skills, right? And this was his Instagram. He gave himself the challenge of just designing things because he loved it. And he emailed me one day and he said, hey, could I come into your department? Could I talk to the 3D guys? I'm like trying to understand better how to get into that world. And, here's my Instagram. And by him having this, he made it so easy for me to advocate for him, because I was able then to go to my supervisors and say, hey, here's a guy, this is his work. He's like super passionate. And he just wants to come in and like see what y'all do. Like, would that be okay? Would you be willing to talk to him? And they said yes. And now he's working there. So when you have a place that shows your work, it helps people understand that what you're doing. It helps see that it helps show that you are dedicated to what you do. That's an important thing, because if I'm hiring somebody to be on my team, hiring people is expensive. I have to train you. I have to give you benefits, all the things, right? I want to know that somebody is dedicated and that they're doing this, and more than anything, that they're not just like applying to a bunch of like random things, but that they're actually like really embedded into this thing that they say they're very embedded into. The next thing is, are you a good internet neighbor? Are you active online? Do you comment on people's posts? Do you celebrate their wins? Do you retweet their content? This is so important. And this is like a great thing to do, even when you're like not actively working on your brand, because what happens is that people notice when you're a good internet neighbor. And then next time when you're like, what's up, y'all? Like, I'm looking for a job or whatever, or like, I just launched this thing, or I'm selling this t-shirt, whatever your thing might be. The fact that you were a good internet neighbor means that it is likely that people will be a good internet neighbor back. And that is an important part of building your online brand. Do you have a bio? A bio that can tell me, where you're coming from, what's your experience, what are you working on, kind of where are you projecting yourself to be? I rewrite my bio every 6 months, and I share it on my Instagram. I'm, updated on LinkedIn and all the things. And again, this is the idea of you take control of your narrative. You say, I am this person, I care about this, here's what I'm working on, here's what I would like to work on next. And so this is a really, really great way to take control of your narrative. You can look at the exercise that I posted to help you kind of write out your career trajectory. But I would, see if it makes sense for you, but maybe include that as part of your bio. And again, this is a way that helps people connect with you. This is really important too. So many times where I'm like trying to advocate for people, trying to get them hired, and I'm, like trying to connect them to such a person, and I'm like, cannot find their email. I can't find how to get in touch with them. So this is like really basic. Like, can I find your contact info easy? Like, is it on your LinkedIn? Is it wherever it makes sense for you? So if you're leading people from your social media into somewhere where you're showing your work, like a website, can we see what your how to get in touch with you there? And then when people do get in touch with you, this one is so important. Like, are you responsive? Do you follow up? Like if you do meet with somebody to say, hey, I want to learn more about UX, and can we have coffee? After you have coffee, do you respond and say, hey, thank you so much for that book recommendation. I read it and I loved it, so thank you. These are all parts of your brand, because remember, your brand is all about how people feel when they interact with you. And that is much more than just the visual aspect of it. And finally, this is for the people that are like really hardcore, like job hunting, or like are really trying to get eyeballs on their brand. Are you actively creating or curating content that is relevant to your audience? So if your audience is, I don't know, somebody in a certain part of the tech world, and you're trying to position yourself as an expert, you're trying to show people that you would be a good person to have on your team. It could be a simple, say you're a project or a product manager. It could be as simple as like once a week, I'm going to write a little blog post on my favorite project management tools. Or I'm just going to like reshare this article about project management and add like 2 sentences about my thoughts on it. When you're creating this content, you are positioning yourself to say, I care about this, I'm knowledgeable about this, I'm reading about this, I'm active in this world. And that is a very important part of your brand. So when you think about your brand, the mistake that people make is that they think that they can just build this beautiful website, this beautiful house, and that people will just come to it. But that is just not how it works. Through the content that we create, that is specifically tailored to our goal and with our audience in mind, we give them an opportunity to connect with us. So whether it's like, hey, I just made this thing, cool, check it out. Or like, hello, I'm sending you an email, like, can we talk about this? Or whether it's like, I'm just sharing this article. All of these things are an opportunity for that person to come back to whatever your social media profile is. And that profile will have a link to wherever you're showing your work. And it is that back and forth that gets you known. We know that people have to see things between like 8 and 14 times before they will like buy it or say yes. So that also means that if you're looking for a position, you're posting and you're saying, hey, I'm actively looking for this sort of role. And you're kind of putting that in with the other content that you're sharing, right? With the like, here's this interesting article, here's a past project I worked on. And you're creating this content to create a connection with your audience and to bring them back to this beautiful little house that you've built with your brand, that matches your goals, that speaks about your story and where you're trying to go. So a brand is totally a tool that can help you reach your goals if you use it with intentionality. And the important part in all of this is don't forget that your story matters. The first part of all of this work, when you think about your brand, is who are you? So that means, all of you, your background, your heritage, all of these things are important. And also think about like, what's the future story that you're creating? And what is that goal that you're building toward and that you're going to? Yes, so I think I'm 3 minutes early, but I flew through that presentation. Thank y'all so much for listening, for being here. And then now we can head over to do QA. Am I just pulling these up, or are you facilitating?
We have the questions up, and if you want, I can help out with that, and I'll read the questions. We did have a couple upvotes, so people are interacting. I'm just as another heads up, y'all, we are taking questions in the Q&A. We are encouraging people to upvote questions that are similar to theirs. So while I go ahead and kick off with the 4 questions that we have thus far, it's not too late. So if you still have questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. But thus far, our first question comes from Maria Sanchez Tellez. If you have worked overtime to grow your brand internally at a company, how can you best translate this similar brand or even a better version externally?
Sorry, can you read that again?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have worked overtime to grow your brand internally at a company, how can you best translate this similar brand or even a better version externally?
I have questions about this, but they can't unmute themselves, can they?
No, but Maria, if you're still here, you can put any clarifications or answers into the chat. And I can go ahead and read them for you. But I think this just means, so like, if I have a strong brand cultivated internally, so for example, me at Tequeria or at my day job at MailChimp, how can I think about how I evolve that or how I articulate that as I start to convert to an external brand? So what should I be thinking about when I'm beginning to develop like the things that my manager says in my reviews into content that I can actually put out either on my Instagram or a blog or something that talks about me externally?
Got it. Thank you for that clarification. I was like, what?
It looks like Maria just said exactly. So it
I
works
can
out.
unmute her as well.
Okay.
I do have the ability to do that. If Maria, I'll allow you to talk if you wanted to add anything to that.
Okay. Maria, if you have anything to add, feel free to tell us in the chat and we can unmute you.
That was exactly it.
That was exactly it. Okay, awesome. So I think there are times when there are parts of your brand that are confidential for some reason. Like maybe you can't share, like, I know that there's weirdness when you're like, I have a job and I don't want them to see me working too much on my brand because they might get a little bit nervous. So I want to acknowledge that that's a thing. So if that is the case, I would always recommend that you are just keeping track of like, what are the things, right? Like, this is like great results that I got. This is a cool project that I worked on. Like, you have all that stuff kind of in a folder somewhere so that when you're ready to kind of really activate your brand, you have it ready to go. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is that where you're at now and this great brand that you've built for yourself is like a small part of your bigger story. So I would say, you know, with time, you will build your brand and that'll be, you know, it's like, they're like building blocks. So if this is one of your first roles or whatever, you're like, here's what I've done, here's who I am. And then once you know, in a few years, once you have more information, you add on to that. And that's, you know, how you start building your brand based on you, if that makes sense.
Awesome. So I'm going to move on to the next question. This one is from Delia Davila. I'm very passionate about a topic, but I worry I will not be taken as an expert. And this idea makes me worry I'm not an expert. What helps overcoming this? So this sounds an awful lot like imposter syndrome.
Yes, yes. So if you are not familiar with imposter syndrome, it's really fascinating to figure out. Like, there's like a chart that you can see like how it works. So I encourage anybody that feels like they have imposter syndrome to like YouTube, like, how does imposter phenomenon work, right? I would say that I talk to a lot of people, and most people I know, specifically female identifying people, do not feel like experts. And we kind of show up and we do it anyway. So there is a piece of it where you just have to know, part of me is always going to feel a little bit uncomfortable with this. The other side of it is you build confidence with time. And you kind of like grow into your brand too. Like, you don't, like, I didn't come out and say like, hey, I'm like a branding expert, like right out of school. It's like, I've built time, like I've done it over time. And now I feel like that title fits me, but there's probably a time where like the shoes felt a little bit big. Like I was like, I'm pretty sure I can do that, but not 100%. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to claim a title, even if you're not 100%. And just know that like nobody is going to come and like question you or like poke at what you're saying. The other thing I would say is to keep evidence that you are an expert and that you're learning to be an expert, right? So when people are asking you for help, if you have a degree, or maybe you don't have a degree, but you've studied this for, you read articles or you devote time to learning about it every week.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize you were here. Cool.
Awesome. Next, we have Renee asking, is there a version of this for people that aren't heavily involved in social media? Or maybe what recommendations would you have for people who aren't heavily social media users?
That's a great question. There has to be a way for you to, like that last picture where I'm like showing you how you reach your audience. Maybe it's not social media, but is it like maybe networking events? Is it within organizations that are specific to your industry? I think you have to think about, yeah, like how do you create a house so that if somebody finds it, it has kind of those things that I'm talking about, like who are you, what do you do, where's your work? And I mean, it could be just a website, not just a website, it could be a website. But then how do you bring people to that? Are you emailing them and saying like, hey, check out my website? Like it's that outbound piece that you have to figure out what is right for you. And with that, I would again always center it with your goal. Like what's your goal? Like if you have happily employed, then don't worry about social media. But if you are looking for a job, how are you gonna reach out to people to connect?
Yeah, and someone actually brought up a point that you brought up during in the chat during the presentation. GitHub is a really good alternative. It's not necessarily social, but it's a good way to build and surface your portfolio, like you said. And that came from another Rene, not the same Rene. So the next question is from Carlos. What do we do when Google results point to someone else with our names in a completely different field? Even recruiters through LinkedIn have gotten the wrong person. And that's, yeah, from Carlos.
Yeah, one of my friends, actually his name was Carlos too, one of my college friends, when they Googled his name, it was this awesome male ballerina. And he was like, I don't know what to do with this. So, and then I also had a friend who her exact name was a stripper's name. And if you Googled it, like that's what you got. So like this stuff happens. The more that you put out stuff with your name, the more likely that you're like Google is going to pick it up at some point and like bring you up. So that's one option. Another option is if you have a middle name or like a second last name that you can use so that people can know that, you have your middle initial and then that's how you come up.
Awesome. Next is from Andrew Gonzalez. Do you have any tips or advice when it comes to reaching out to people on LinkedIn to set up informational interviews or simply connect with them to learn more about their work? How can we be the best online neighbor when doing so?
That's a really good question. I would say, so across the board, whenever possible, try to connect through people, like find a person that knows a person that can connect you to that person, because it's just an easier connection that happens that way. So because cold emailing people is difficult. What I would say on LinkedIn specifically, here's what I would do. And I'm not the know-all end all of anything. Like you have to try it and see what works for you. But you can just connect with people or follow them and then start interacting with their content. Like if there are a UX designer and they're posting articles and stuff, start commenting and start having a relationship so that eventually you can say like, hey, I have a question, do you mind if I private message you? And, we set up a time to talk. With all of these things, like having specific questions is really, really important.
Perfect. So Salazar Fabiola asks, do you know of any resources for learning how to write blog posts or create video content?
Write blog post or create video content. Yeah, I'm sure you can YouTube and find like a bunch of people. I guess my question would be like, what are you trying to do? Like, what is there a skill you're trying to learn, or what is the kind of the goal behind it? I think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess my thought process is that I've seen blogs that sort of tell a story but don't really draw out a lesson or learning. And so I think that we can all write, but the very good bloggers that I've seen are able to articulate what they're trying to teach you and make it so that it's fun and entertaining, but yet you're learning. So I think there is sort of a bit of a art to being able to write with the goal of teaching someone, let's say, on how to raise venture capital or how to create financial models, if that makes any sense.
Yes, totally. I have a book right here. This is a book that somebody recommended to me. It's like $10 on Amazon, and it's called "This Book Will Teach You How to Write." Because you're right, specifically when it comes about to copy, the way we were taught to write is not the way we write for the internet. So there is a specific language. So this book is one that I would recommend. I would look up like a copywriting for blogs. There is like Marie Forleo has her Copy Cure suite. It's like a whole program. And then Laura Belgray, who is one of the people in her program, also talks a lot about this. So I think if you start, just look for people. Something I do is I look for people that have a skill set I'm trying to get. And with writing is awesome because all you have to do is like look at their blog post and then think about like, okay, this person's a writer and this blog post is about teaching me how to write. Like, can I mimic the structure that she used to show me the content and put my own content in there. So start following people and seeing what they're doing. That's what I would say. And when it comes to like videos or copy, those are like two skill sets. So like focus on one. Sometimes when people are starting brands, they spread really wide, like they're trying to do all the things, but it's much more effective to be really good at one thing. And when it comes to creating content, I would say create content in whatever way is the most natural to you. So for me, writing takes forever, days, but I could talk all week, all day. So I started a podcast. So lean on your strengths.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Next question is from Victor Rico. Where do you start to build your brand, and which are the social media outlets that you recommend to get exposed to? Also, where do you keep the line between personal life and professional brand?
Okay. So where do you start? I would start with the list that I gave you. You know, a place to show your work, a brief statement that helps people understand what you do, a short bio. Just start with the like bare minimum. It could just be like an Instagram or a Twitter, or, you know, it doesn't have to be a website yet. In terms of like social media, where should you focus? My question is, what's your goal and who's your audience and where do they hang out? Because that's where your answer is. If your people are on Twitter, then that's, and you feel comfortable with Twitter, like that's where you should go hang out and try to find them. And then the last question is, where do you draw the line with like personal life and professional life? People like people want to know people, right? That doesn't mean that people want to see videos of me like brushing my teeth in the morning. But it does mean that there are things about my personality that help people connect with me. And so what I can tell you about that is that I think the important piece is being intentional about it. So for example, with me, I very intentionally post really silly things sometimes because my sense of humor is really important to me. And I want to work with clients that can deal with that like my sense of humor, that have a sense of humor. So it connects to my audience and my goals. Maybe if I was a lawyer, I wouldn't post like videos of my cat wearing hats, but I'm not, so I do. So it comes back to your audience and your goal always.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Ileana Lugo asks, how can the knowledge used in personal branding be applied in branding for small businesses and entrepreneurs?
Ooh, you should follow me because that's all I talk about. I focus on working with business owners. So you follow the same structure. The same 4 questions can be used for any brand. Who are you? Who needs to know? Why should they care? And how will they find you? But it's exactly the same thing, except and also if you're working with a team or like a bigger company, there's more layers to it. But most of my clients are solopreneurs. They're like service providers, so their brand is just an extension of who they are.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
And I will say, so that we're conscious of time, while we're finishing up these questions, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to a Google form where if you would like to sign up for to potentially receive one of the 4 scholarships for a one-on-one strategy session with Pamela, go ahead and fill that out. At the very end of this, we'll be randomly selecting 4 of the attendees who filled out that form. So just make sure to fill that out if you are interested in one of those one-on-one strategy sessions. Okay, so the next question is from Allie. Is it better to not be found on the internet versus being found? So Facebook, Instagram, predominantly social.
That's a good question. I think it would have to do with your audience. Some people like, I don't know, if you're in marketing and you're applying for a marketing role, your personal brand and your personal social media is an important marker of like, hey, I know how to use social media. If you're, for whatever reason, in a role where like that doesn't matter at all, no, sorry, I'm gonna take it back. I think it still matters. I don't think you have to show up everywhere and like have a super strong personal brand, but you should have at least a link that you can send people that says, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's my work. Yes, that's what I'm gonna say, but I would do more research on this. Who's your audience? What do they care about? What's your industry? What do they think if they can't find you?
Awesome. Do you have a follow-up question, Allie, or an industry?
Yeah, let me know if you have a follow-up question. That's a great question. I also think younger generations are like way more conscious of their social media and more likely to not want to appear anywhere, which is a thing.
So I didn't hear all of that, but it says, the part I could hear was, I think she said, no, you answered the question.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Okay. If I misheard you, Ali, feel free to drop into the chat some text and I will follow up with Pamela. So Maggie Gomez asks, trying to pivot careers from financial services to tech, recommendations?
I would start with that career trajectory kind of outline that I gave you to try to figure out like what parts of your story, like you were already using tech because you're alive and it's 2020. So what parts of your story can you highlight to say like, hey, I was working in financial services, but I loved this software that we used and I was really eager to, get new software, like whatever story you can tell around what's been the connection with tech already, if that's possible. If not, I would just start doing research, like what kinds of tech roles are you interested in? How can you find what people are looking for in those worlds? What kind of skills do you need to have? I would start with the audience kind of research part.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. So our next is from Eda Marcos, who asks, how do you build your brand when you're new to the field and don't have a lot to show yet for career change?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's great to be new, and all of us were new at some point. So it's a really good time to start building your brand. Like say if you were a designer and you just don't have a lot of work, you might share a design that you really like, or you might share brands that you really like, and maybe say like, hey, I just got this drink, I loved how they did this, or I love their social media. Like, you can just start to share that you are interested in that like subject matter. Because if I'm going to hire somebody and I see somebody online that clearly like kind of nerds out over the thing that I want to hire for, I'm going to want to work with them more than if that's not present at all. Did you have any follow-up questions to that?
Yes, thank you. I guess I was kind of picturing, how do you do it when it's something that's not very visual? Like if you want to go into marketing.
Yeah, I mean, with marketing, you can totally, same thing. You can say, here are brands that I admire right now. Here is, there is a visual aspect to marketing. It is about how you talk about it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
And it might feel uncomfortable for any of you that are like making a switch and like trying new things. It's going to feel a little bit uncomfortable, and it's okay. I think we all felt a little bit uncomfortable at some point.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Next we have, I think this question might have come up twice. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this might be duplicated in the Q&A window, and trying to pivot careers from financial services to tech, right?
Oh yeah.
We just did that one. Okay, duplicated. Ileana Lugo asks, what advice do you have for networking in person at events and sharing your brand?
That's a great question. So I think the important thing to remember with networking in person or online is that it's really about creating relationships. It's not so much just about like you going to a person and being like, hello, here's my thing, then you get that like SpongeBob meme that I had where we're like throwing petals and they're like, oh my God. So I think it's about like creating connections, like get to know people, like, hey, like, what's your name? Like, what do you do? Can I follow you can we connect on LinkedIn? We connect on Instagram? And just keeping a relationship going by liking their post, by commenting on their posts. But I would just approach it like you would approach meeting anybody. Like, what's something you have in common? Like, even like, hey, the little sandwiches are so good, or whatever, whenever we can be in rooms with little sandwiches again. And just look to connect with people. Remember that piece about, our personal stories and our emotions are how we make connections. And what I would say with in-person networking is when you can connect with them on like LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, like you'll follow each other, and the more that you engage with each other is the greater chance that they'll eventually look at your bio or your profile, which might lead them to your website. So it takes steps.
All right, and then the last question we have in the Q&A box is from Francisco Gonzalez. I know individuals have created a GitHub portfolio. Are there any starter guides or recommendations that you might be able to point to?
I cannot speak directly to GitHub. I don't know if one of y'all can. Does that just mean like a GitHub, like it'll make it look like a portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, so I can speak to this a little bit. A GitHub repository, you'll generally want to start by making your own account. And then GitHub allows you to kind of maintain your own code repositories. So this is really specific to if you're looking to be a software developer or even a backend developer, any type of engineering that is super code-based. GitHub has a lot of those guides in their knowledge base already, but I would recommend, and so as a person that helps with hiring within engineering departments at my company, I can say that some of the things that I look for the most are not just the code, like obviously the quality of your code needs to be there in a relative sense, but also like what are your habits around creating README files and documentation to go with your code repositories or going with those branches and projects, because it's as important. Almost any company that you go to, they're going to have their own coding best practices. They're going to have their own kind of like style for their engineering departments. But what is going to make you unique is going to be what processes do you already have that they won't necessarily have to train you on. So are you a good steward of your code? Meaning, do you leave good comments? Do you leave documentation about why you made the decisions you made when putting together even something small, like it might be like a simple Chrome extension for something like Tabby Cats. So how did you go about designing it? How did you go about thinking about it? And can you articulate that in text as well as you can design it and code it with your actual code? Hoping that was helpful.
Yeah, yes, it was. Greatly appreciated.
That's awesome. Yeah. And that kind of goes back to that whole like, your brand is about how people feel. And when you want to get hired, you want people to feel like I can trust this person is committed, this person, you know, is responsive. So those are just as important, like you're saying, as like anything else.
Yeah, hiring people on a hiring panel want to hire good coworkers. And so it's not just about like the work that you're able to show them, but also like, can you think about other people as you're developing your work? Like me as a technical product manager, I like and I need to be able to understand your technical decisions as you make them to make sure that they align with the overall vision of what we're trying to build together. So I'm hiring for a good coworker, not just the most talented engineer available.
Yes.
Okay, so we've gotten through all of the questions in the Q&A section. I'm gonna call it here, refresh on the form. We did have a good number of people fill it out, so I'm going to randomly generate some numbers. And then any folks, if you are selected as the scholarship recipient, we will be passing Pamela's contact information to you directly so that you can work with Pamela to schedule that one-on-one strategy session. So thank you all for attending. Thank you to the folks who filled out the form to apply for a strategy session with Pamela. And of course, goes unsaid. Thank you, Pamela, for coming and spending time with us at Tequeria. We appreciate you and your knowledge so, so much. You're incredible.
Thank you all.
All right, and with that said, I'm gonna generate some numbers. All right, the first person is Adriana Reyes Ramirez. So congratulations to you. Next person is Lara Stanger. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but congrats to you. We'll be contacting y'all. Then we've got Maggie Gomez. And last but not least, we have, okay, it was Maggie Gomez again. It's not really helpful. All right, actually last is Ana Cervantes. So I will be emailing y'all directly with next steps from Pamela. So the four of you can reach out directly to her. And as soon as we have this recording, we will make it available for y'all. Any last thoughts from you, Brian or Edward?
No, congrats everybody that won. And again, thank you, Pamela. Really, really appreciate your time. This was awesome.
Yay, thank y'all.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us.
All right.
Have a nice night.
Bye.
Bye.